Welcome, everyone. Today we have Rodney Sloan on the interview today. So Rodney, he's involved in a lot of different things. One of the major things is Rising Phoenix Games. So Rodney, I'd love to hear more about that, what you're involved in and what you're doing.
Yeah, so I started Rising Phoenix Games about 10 years ago. I was doing web design and web apps, but my background is multimedia, so I really wanted to use that and also my passion for writing and for role-playing games. And publishing role-playing games just seemed like the natural fit. Around the same time, John Ford put out a course called The Gamer's Lifestyle. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but basically it was how to start an RPG company or RPG business. I used that and just my own research, my own experience as well to form the idea for the company. But then I went overseas to Japan for 5 years. So instead of sort of launching the company, it was sort of on the back burner, and I was using that time in Japan to basically learn about the industry, learn how to write games. I built a few projects or wrote a few projects, got to know some people in the industry. And basically from that, I then reached out to other companies and started freelancing. And by the time I got back to South Africa, started doing Rising Phoenix basically full-time with freelancing on the side to support that.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, so I noticed that, Rising Phoenix Games on the website, it lists, various different things, including different games, different projects. Can you tell me more about the projects and the games that you have on your website?
Yeah, so we mainly support or mainly make games for Pathfinder 2nd edition, Dungeons and Dragons, so the main D20 games, and then standalone games. For D&D, which is really doing well right now, we have stuff that we sell on the Dungeon Masters Guild, and then also stuff that supports the open game license. So we have a series called Choose Your Destiny Adventures, which is basically like a one-on-one or a solo game. The rules are your GM or DM, and you just play through it like that. We've got 3 titles out at the moment, and then another one in the works. They're not interconnected, so you can pick up the first one, which is for I think it's first to 3rd level, but I'm not sure exactly. It might be 1st and 2nd, and you can play that, and then you can pretty much pick and choose any of them and go from there. Maybe our biggest project at the moment is the Undersea source books, which is for the DM's Guild, which is basically everything you need from player character options to it will eventually include magic and options for DMs, all of that for an undersea campaign or pirate campaign, something like that. Like if you're playing Ghosts of Saltmarsh, plenty of options in that for you. So yeah, I think that's pretty much D&D. We've got a lot of stuff. And then so Pathfinder now, 2nd edition, we've our most recent publication is Heaven and Hell, Aasimar and Tiefling Ancestries. I've actually got the book here, so I can show something.
Nice.
So this is the cover of it. I don't know if you can see with all the lights there. But basically options for your Aasimar or Tiefling. And we've got Madness cards coming out for the game too, which will be basically it's a deck like this with a bunch of options printed on it for say you walk into the dragon's lair and the dragon jumps out at you, and now you make a roll against wisdom save, for D&D. Then the DM can just draw a card and give you a madness like this, and then you can keep it in there. There are 2 copies, so one for you and one for the DM. And so this one here, this deck here is the I don't know if you can see that, but that's for D&D or 5th edition. This is for what uses the OGL. and now we're bringing out one for Pathfinder 2nd edition too. So that's pretty cool. I'm quite excited about that. I think it's quite nice to have cards in your hand that have all the rules on them. It's such an easy way, instead of flipping through the book to find rules, you just have the card on hand and you can keep it with your character sheet or whatever. So yeah, something I'm quite excited about. We have a bunch of all-in-one games. That's the way. Most of them are published here in South Africa, but created by South African publishers. So Claustrophobia is one I did. Then we've got 2 books, Might and Bullet, which are both produced or written by Basil Kufos, another South African role player. And then another one, which is kind of a LARP game. It's How to Plan a Murder, which is a murder mystery dinner type affair. And that was done by Chris Visser, which is another South African. So it's kind of nice for me as a South African role player to be able to support the community and publish some of those games. There are other guys publishing from this side, but it's nice to also be a part of that community and be able to say, hey, come check out what we're doing, because I think we're doing some interesting things. And the world of role-playing is really interconnected, especially now. I mean, look at us here talking across the oceans kind of thing. Yeah, so those are the main things that we have at the moment, and we're keeping ourselves busy. We've got a lot of other things coming.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah, that's very cool. There's a couple points I want to touch on. You said a lot of great things. You mentioned that you went to Japan for a while and you learned a lot from there. I'd love to hear what specifically things you learned there and how you translate that over into your existing venture.
Okay, I think for RPGs specifically, while I was there, I spent a lot of time reading the forums for the RPG Superstar that Paizo used to host. There's an RPG Superstar happening now as well. But what was nice about that is the judges would leave comments for all of the entrants, each contestant's entry in each of the rounds. And there was just so much to be learned from that. So I think, having some time to spend researching and reading, and that is just so invaluable. From Japan, I learned so much. I think the thing that sticks out to me the most, which maybe doesn't directly relate to role playing, but I think is so important, was the sort of switch in perception. So like in South Africa, I'd always had this perception of, okay, this is what's right, this is what's true, but then when I went to Japan, a lot of that stuff was flipped on its head. So like it's kind of a funny story, but I remember a lot of the guys who were teaching there, and girls as well, were big into role playing, and so we got together and we started role playing, and it was kind of natural for me to tell jokes about drugs, because here it was so common for people to tell jokes about drugs. But then in Japan, people were kind of like, what are you talking about? And it's just kind of like, that was so freeing, I think, to be like, okay, just because that was the normal thing there doesn't mean that it has to be the normal thing, I would also definitely say that I'm an introvert, and in Japan there's sort of like this, it's more common to be introverted, or more polite to be introverted, it seems, whereas I guess it's the same in America, but here as well, where it's almost like people will say, why are you so quiet? Or like, come and hang out with us.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I'm thinking like, my books are waiting for me. I'd rather spend time with, role playing is different because you meet in a small group and you're very like-minded. And I think a lot of introverts sort of come out of their shells because of role playing. But Japan taught me that, that was really okay. Like if you're an introvert, there's a place for you, and even to be introverted in a way is celebrated, I think, in Japan. So I think that was the biggest lesson. Just because you've grown up seeing things a certain way doesn't mean that's the truth. And I think a lot of us as role players, we already question things a lot. So it's freeing to be able to say, okay, yeah, just because that's what I see doesn't mean that's it.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of wisdom in there. I think that's a really cool experience you gained from that.
I hope I'm not being too preachy, but it's
oh no, I think that's
like
really
one
cool.
of the things that kind of stands out to me and just blew my mind, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an incredible experience. I could definitely, resonate with that too. I think, yeah, it's, just because something is a certain way in a certain area doesn't mean that's necessarily the truth, even within that area either. So I think that's really cool to hear.
As a game designer, and you probably see this all the time, like people have this perception, like, okay, what are you doing with your time? What's your real job? It's like, no, I'm editing blog posts, I'm writing adventures, I'm coming up with mechanics, I'm editing things, organizing layout. That is my real job, and it's producing something. And even that, like, there are these perceptions, but those perceptions aren't the truth.
Yeah, I think it's awesome you're following your passion and you're doing so. Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of I think the world now is becoming more open to like different things like this, right? It's becoming maybe because of the internet and people being able to find each other online, it's becoming a more like you can do whatever you want kind of world. And I think that's really cool that we're seeing that now.
I really appreciate all the input my parents have given me, but they'll still be like, oh, there's this job offer, this job offer, and I'm like, no, I'm good, I've got work to do. And that's also like, I mean, that they mean the best, and I really respect their input, but I think that's also like the perception.
Yeah, that's fair. In regards to the current environment now in July 2020, there's COVID right now, and things have kind of changed across all industries. Specifically on Kickstarter, where I'm a little more involved in, like with my community, like there's a lot of people that are kind of worried about, oh, should I launch a game now because it's people's budgets are tight or because the environment's different now. So how have you experienced within your industry, have you experienced any changes because of COVID?
I would definitely say like sales boomed sort of early on. I haven't seen a real drop personally, but I kind of expect that there will be a drop as people's budgets just decrease. But it also seems to me like just a funny thing. Someone was talking about skateboards the other day, and like how skateboard sales always go up when there's like a crisis, because it's like a cheap mode of transport and a cheap way to entertain yourself and things like that. And I guess maybe the same is true for role-playing games. Like, I know like my brother, he's playing online with his group, and even some of the guys aren't very keen on playing online, but that's their only option. So it's happening. So I think there's still a market there, and I think that market is definitely bigger, or especially if you're selling digital products, because then I think it's a lot easier. For example, shipping to us in South Africa has mostly stopped for a lot of things. So I can't order, for example, if I want the Pathfinder 2nd edition core rulebook, I can't order it because of the borders being closed. So it's almost better to focus on digital, or at least have digital products as your backup. So like we have, so like a book like this is print on demand, but then we also have the PDFs. So I think that helps the diversity.
Yeah, definitely. I think having the option to do digital is definitely a lifesaver in times like these, in which that's kind of the only option right now for most people, at least. I know that you host various different games on your website. I was curious, how do these people, do they pitch their ideas to you, or how do they find you, and how do you decide which ones to proceed with?
Yeah, so for the South African stuff, a lot of the times it's friends of mine who who knew I was doing Rising Phoenix. So they're like, okay, well, I've got this idea for a game. Or in the case of Might, it had already been published. I said to Basil, the guy who created the book, I said, what about, would you be interested if I published it digitally and sold it on drive-through for you? And just because I have a lot more customers, a bigger customer base, it was word of mouth. And then for things like wherever we get freelancers, either we'll send out something on the Peso forums, or there's a freelance forge is also a good place, or most of the time it's also people who I've worked with before. So I think it definitely says a lot. Like if you know someone, if you worked with someone before, that's often the way to get more work. As long as you're a nice guy to work with, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a big factor, I'm sure. That's cool to hear. I was wondering if you had like any maybe insights of like, I was curious like what types of game maybe perform better than others, or if there's any like distinctions you've noticed between different games, between the ones that are, sold more and the ones that maybe aren't sold as much.
So definitely I would say any of our stuff that supports D&D, if it's sold on the DM's Guild, will far outsell anything that supports the 5th edition OGL if we sell it on drive-through RPG. And I think that seems to be like the general trend for most of the publishers I've spoken to. Whereas like Pathfinder 2nd edition is doing okay, and I think there's still a lot of room for growth, but I think people are still getting into the system. So I think anything that supports an existing property, so anything that supports an existing system is a pretty good way to go. If you do something that's standalone, then it's a bit more difficult, I think, because you have to, first of all, you have to sell people on the idea that you know what you're doing. So I think if you do a lot of indie games, then you start to create a name for yourself. Whereas if you're publishing something for an existing title or existing system, then people who are playing that are already interested. So it kind of makes more sense to support something, which is kind of why we've gone the way we've gone, because I would like to do a lot of indie games, but you kind of have to do, it seems to me at least, you have to do both until your name is out there. So we've got more indie games coming out. I'm busy working on the 2nd edition of Claustrophobia. So all of that is still ongoing, and definitely something I'm passionate about. I think the indie games scene is so important to the industry, to gaming, but kind of we depend on having the third party publisher content as well to just kind of keep rolling. Hopefully things will change as we get more people interested in the standalone stuff we're doing, because I think that's where you get to innovate the most. So as a creator, that's often the most exciting. Not to say that you can't innovate if you're doing something for D&D, it's just you have sort of absolute freedom, so which is kind of nice, especially in something like role playing, which is inherently free, I think.
Yeah, that's cool to hear. I definitely agree with that. I mean, if you are to make your own indie game that's standalone, you have to one, as you mentioned, sell the idea to the people. It's a lot easier to sell them the idea if it's already based on something else, right? Than it is to make your own thing. So that's one hurdle we have to get past. And the second hurdle you mentioned too is kind of like the community and building the following, a customer base. Because if it's your first time doing something, a new indie game, and you don't have any following, and you have to also sell the people on the idea, it's kind of difficult, right? So that's definitely makes sense. That it's definitely a good way to start is by not maybe doing the standalones, but then once you have the audience, then maybe convert them into your standalone afterwards, or build a few indie games to prove yourself, to show that you know what you're doing. And then, once you have that following or that community, then, it's going to be more successful going forward.
Yeah, I think now, like, there's so many contests as well. The Claustrophobia started as a 24-hour RPG design contest on 1,000 typewriters. What's it? 1,000 typewriters, 1,000 monkeys, or 1,000 monkeys, 1,000 typewriters. I'm not sure. But basically, it started as a a contest entry, and then I took it further. But there's so many contests for indie games right now that if you want to go into indie publishing, it's such a good idea to enter those contests, because that's how you'll learn. And even if what you make isn't interesting enough for people, you're gonna learn so many things that you can apply to the next thing, and eventually you'll get to a point where you've got something that's awesome and people want. And I think that's a really good way to do it. So
yeah, that's really smart. I think contests are a great way. I was actually going to ask, my next question is, what have you done for marketing, and what has worked well for you? It sounds like the contests are a great place to start. I'm curious for other methods that have been used.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird one for us, because I feel like so many people talk about social media marketing, and that's not something that ever really worked for us or for me. And I suppose it's how you tackle it and what you're posting about. I have friends that, for example, guy on how to be a great GM on YouTube. He has an amazing channel and has built up a great following. That's a different kind of content from what we're trying to do. So, but then when he puts out a book, he's got a customer base which is interested in that book. My first way of marketing was to take the blog and blog often and use that as a way of marketing. And it's been, it feels to me at least like it's sort of been a stumbling process of seeing what works and what doesn't. Like you throw stuff at the wall and some of it sticks. So now we've started this, I'm developing this setting called Valkyrie Ragnarok. And that's basically a fantasy setting. Will include a novel and a bunch of core books, and then more products as we go along. But the idea is that every month I post some short piece of fiction on the blog, and then a longer piece of fiction on the newsletter. So for me, it's really exciting because I'm exploring the world with everyone. I'm, sharing, okay, this is what I've written for the story, but behind it is, say, all the research, and maybe I've spent time drawing maps or whatever to try and figure out and solve certain parts of the story. And then I can post that, and then people can read that every month, and then hopefully if they like it, they'll come back next month. And so far it seems to be working. Our newsletter subscription is definitely, we have got more subscribers every month, and I'm getting to do what I like to do, is writing stories, creating, and coming up with something that is hopefully worthwhile to people. Like if they enjoy the stories, then I've achieved something. But then I feel a lot better about myself, because I'm not just spamming people's social media with adverts. I mean, we do at the end of the newsletter, obviously we talk about what products we've put out, but it's not so, I think, in your face, which I think people are tired of marketing. So you have to be careful of marketing. But yeah, I don't know, I'm still learning. There's so much to learn about marketing, but for myself, I think I would rather steer away from that sort of spamming people's inboxes. So if it's once a month, if it's something that people are interested in, they can subscribe to it, and if they're not, then they can let it go. And then we always have our website so people can check out whatever we've posted up on the blog, or what products we have for sale. So yeah, like I say, still learning.
Yeah, I think it's important to do what works, of course, but also what you enjoy doing too. You don't, even if something works but you don't enjoy it, it's not really sustainable for you to continue it. So definitely, it's definitely experimenting too. I mean, trying different things, see what works well, what things you enjoy, of course, and then focusing on those things that you enjoy and are also doing well too. So it sounds like you've already found some mediums for that, and that's great.
So one of the things we definitely tried posting on Facebook and on Twitter, like because you can put the code on to your URLs for products from DriveThruRPG. For a whole year, we didn't. I think we saw no sales through the social media. Which, you know, if we talked about a product in a Facebook group or something, it would be different. Like people would be interested, or especially because you become friends with people in the community, you'll get a lot of likes from people you know and whatever. And I think that's when it becomes social media. Otherwise, it's just kind of like impersonal media. You know what I mean? I think people are also starting to look at Facebook in a different way. There was a time when Facebook, for example, was really new and exciting, and now some aspects of it are becoming quite tiring to people. That's at least my opinion. Again, it's like people's mileage will vary depending on the type of person they are, I think. So for me, as someone who's maybe more introverted, I don't naturally start up conversations. So, you know, that's probably one of the things that affects the way I use social media, which, you know, it all has a kind of knock on, I guess. But yeah, what we're doing now seems to be working, and I'm enjoying that. So I'll just keep at it and keep learning. You know, that's the most important thing. Keep learning, keep trying things. So.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess my last question is, you know, you mentioned in the interview already the things that you've been working on, and you mentioned some indie games too. I'd love to hear more about the indie games and like what is in store for them.
Okay, so actually a big one, we partnered with Period Publishing, who does the Nightscape series. So it's basically Lovecraftian horror. There's a movie, there are comic books, novels, a lot of them available on Amazon. And we've done Nightscape Red Terrors, which is an RPG set just after the collapse of communist Russia. It's really fascinating because Russia had this thing where they were basically researching the occult for scientific purposes, right? And we've written a game basically about that, where you are an operative and you go into one of these research facilities to find artifacts. So it becomes really fascinating when you start seeing, like, you know, the real world things and then the made up things. Like there's a lot of connection, and it kind of gets really weird, but that's what's fun about it. So that's going to be coming out pretty soon. We're just waiting on we had the print proofs back, and we just needed to make some changes, so we have to send that back. So that's probably like for like a month or so, 4 weeks.
Very cool.
Depending on shipping, basically. So yeah, that is, I think it was but a 40-page book. So yeah, it'll be a nice one. Claustrophobia Unleashed, which will be the second edition of Claustrophobia, which is going to take it from being basically a beer and pretzels RPG to being a much more fully blown thing. And I'm looking at supporting an open license as well, so people will be able to write stuff for that, which I think will be cool.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, well, thanks again, Rodney, for coming on the show today. It's a pleasure talking with you and learning more about what you're doing. Definitely enjoyed this interview, and yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks. It's been fun.